We are back, and we are joined once again by Ettingermentum, aka Josh, whose
Mhm.
latest piece for his Substack, the Ettingermentum newsletter, is entitled "The Tuesday Night Massacre." Josh, welcome back to the show. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to be back on. I'm glad to be here for the return of woke, the official
Yes,
return. It's back. Woke 2 has been invented. Woke 2 has been invented by Zorhan Mamdani, and it's going to be even bigger and better than the past woke. I'm probably going to write an article like titled that. Like I'm serious. It's a real thing, but that is more specific. Anyway, how much have you guys like talked about the election so far? It's only been like 2 days.
I mean,
Like,
we've talked a good amount about it. We were really celebrating, obviously, on Tuesday night,
yeah,
and here in New York City, it's hard not to be excited about it. But
yeah, I'm
what
sure
was
it's
what
great
was
for
the
you guys.
most?
I'm not jealous at
Thanks.
all.
Well, Georgia did well
Yeah,
too.
we got it. Well, that's the Public Service Commission. Like,
Yeah,
we
it's not the
still have a
same.
ways to go. Yeah.
But what was the most dark woke thing? Was it that guy Jay Jones still pulling it
Oh,
out
yeah.
despite the fact that they leaked those text messages? We didn't really talk enough about this. Can you tell people about what happened there?
Yeah. So, in Virginia, as people may or may not know, Virginia, despite being a pretty like kind of consistently blue state now, it's voted Democratic for president like by like relatively wide-ish margins in every election since 2008. It flipped red at all three levels. In 2021, right after the Afghanistan withdrawal, all the Raytheon workers were angry that they weren't getting their checks, so they flipped out and they voted for Republicans in that race as a protest. And people thought that'd be like the start of the red wave, but then the Dobbs decision happened, and it made them like people like those voters kind of go, shy away from Republicans a little bit. But they won all three statewide offices, and the way Virginia works, and it's pretty unique in this, is that they have one term limits for all of their three statewide elected positions: governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. The difference with attorney generals and attorney general isn't term limited. So the Republican incumbent was in that race was the only one who was in who was the only one who was running for reelection, which is supposed to give you kind of a significant advantage relative to an open seat, especially since he's won before. So this was considered like the most competitive race, like even before the scandal happened. But what happened was that a Republican state delegate in Virginia leaked, for some reason, this guy, Jay Jones, a Democrat running for attorney general, he texted a Republican that he wanted like to kill other politicians and see their children die in the
Yeah,
arms of their mothers
it's not
because that
funny.
was yeah, that's what it's not fun. It's very like he's apologized for it. He said he's a changed man, but we all believe in second chances. So
Mm-hmm.
evidently the voters of Virginia do, because this guy, everybody expects him to lose. He's like losing in every single poll. And what happens isn't that like he just wins off of polarization. He won Virginia by more than I think he won Virginia by more than Kamala Harris did. He flipped a county that voted for Trump. So that was the closest statewide race of the entire night. So you have like the guy who was like talking like a serial killer and like in text messages for no reason, who is like putting up the numbers that Democrats like their star candidate with $2 billion of funding achieved last year. So that's just kind of against an incumbent like who was seen as who was won in Virginia before. It's like he's running against like some like total uncredible whack job. So that's kind of the baseline for the results last night. In every single race that was like contested, Democrats significantly outperformed polling. They outperformed expectations. They outperformed Kamala Harris by a lot. I think in Virginia and between Virginia, Georgia, New Jersey, and Georgia, there were only like a total of like two or so counties that didn't see a swing to the left from 2024. In some races, it was I think Spanberger in Virginia, the shift left was as much as 10 points, which is like that puts you very solidly in blue wave territory. And in New Jersey, the shift left was 7 or so points, and that was a race that people thought would be close. There was an unpopular incumbent, Phil Murphy. It's like the kinds of conditions where the Republican can run on a change message that we know have historically been able to break through partisanship in like recent years in statewide elections. Like Democrats were able to win a governor election in Kentucky 2 times, like because the state level politicians were so unpopular. but not in New Jersey, where like the candidate, like everybody was worried that she was going to lose. She performed exceptionally well. And what I think is really notable here, and there's some degree to which like people are saying this just because it was low turnout, but the big really notable thing to me that I was really interested in seeing being tested that night was that there were massive Democratic rebounds with Latino voters and young voters.
Yes.
This is the
Yes.
really huge thing that like I noticed in Virginia and New Jersey. The two, like in both states, that like the areas that had the biggest swings, like in the state, were the most Latino counties. It was like Manassas Park in Virginia swung left by 22 points. Passaic County, I probably butchered the pronunciation of that. I'm not a Northeasterner. In New Jersey, swung to the left by like I think 16 or so points. It was this county that like shockingly voted for Trump. It was pretty solidly blue this time. And in New York, I haven't seen people comment on this. There was obviously the mayoral race, and Zoran did he did pretty well. He won like a couple in some areas that voted for Trump last year. He won some Trump precincts, even while Kamala Harris won New York by 40 points, and he only was winning by 10. So that's a pretty massive like difference. If you look at his relative strength in the city, it was a lot more concentrated probably around the working class than Kamala Harris was, just because of his weakness on the upper east side. But you guys had two. I'm sure you know this. But this is just for like people listening. There are two other elections in New York that were for public advocate and comptroller. And in those races, you didn't have an independent candidate running against a Democrat. It was just Democrat versus Republican race. So this could have been like a case to test. Well, if like they're literally running on the same ballot as Mamdani, so if he's going to hurt the Democratic brand, then like these people could be brought down a bit, and they could like do worse versus their Republican challengers. That's not what happened. In New York, I think Mark Levine, the comptroller candidate, got 75% of the vote. Well, I think Kamala Harris last year in New York City got 68 or 66% of the vote. So that's an even larger swing to the left in New York City, the city that saw some of the most intense swings to the right in 2024, like in the entire country, than any of the races in Virginia and New Jersey. I haven't really seen like the detailed precinct information, but the swings were particularly large in Queens and the Bronx, which suggests that New York City, under like Zoran Mamdani's Democratic Party, you can trademark that, it's official now.
Mhm.
It was exceptionally successful at winning back a lot of the voters who are at least winning back support in the demographics that swung the most towards Trump last year. And I think that's a pretty profound thing, because if you guys can remember from the lame duck period, there was something of a consensus that the coalition that he built with these young voters and these non-white voters was an ideological cultural coalition that was based around anti-woke ideas
Yep.
and a dissatisfaction with the left and the extreme candidates, and that this was a realigning thing in the same way that Reagan or the New Deal was, but in the anti-woke direction. And it's a little suspicious that this supposedly robust ideological majority is completely shifting back in the other direction after less than exactly 1 year. And in response to the economy not doing well and dissatisfaction there, it's almost like the material conditions were actually what determined a lot of these shifts. But I don't know, you could have only like actually just listened to what those people were saying, the like pollsters at the time. I guess that was beneath a lot of the people who wrote about how they were all Reagan conservatives forever now.
Well, like you said a lot there and a lot of
Mhm.
insightful stuff. Let's stick with the Latino vote part for a second.
Yeah.
Because I'll read from your piece here. Mikey Sherrill won by 13 and improved on Kamala Harris by as much as 60 points in heavily Latino and Asian precincts. The same is
Yeah.
true in Virginia, where the largest shift left the entire state. Uh, the largest shift left in the entire state came in Manassas Park, a plurality Hispanic city. You mentioned that, but
Yeah.
the Latino vote, that was really important. Obviously, the Donald Trump's victory, and in New York
Yeah.
City, those are responsible for many of the swings that we saw there. But the fact that that part of his coalition is already crumbling, the redistricting efforts in, say, like
Mhm.
Texas, right, where they're trying to gerrymander even harder than they had before, which could create less
Yeah.
dark red districts and more light red districts that lean Republican, based on the data that they have. But if
Yeah.
that data is based on 2024 and
Hmm.
this Latino support is completely falling apart, that is another way that perhaps Republicans are more weak than they appear to be.
Yeah, I think the Texas. I was planning on writing about Texas. I before the election about how I was like kind of more interested in it, and I know I'm certain everybody listening to this has heard constantly about how like Texas is going to go blue like in the next election, every single election cycle for like 20 years. I will say whatever you want to say about me. I was not that person. I was very vocally anti-Blexis in 2024. It was never part of my vision for like how Republicans could lose. I always penciled them in doing well in Texas and Florida because the Latino vote that year was just like there were so many signs that it was going the wrong way for Democrats. This year, we've seen like a lot of signs that the Latino vote has shifted dramatically against Trump, at least in some polling. I wrote in the piece that one of the things that I thought was so like kind of illuminating about the night and why I thought like the stakes were so high for it is that in polling right now, you see like kind of a consistent average for Trump for the past 6 or so months, ever since Liberation Day, like roughly, and the Zelensky meeting and all the other stuff that he did early on that just killed his honeymoon. You see like this kind of consistent average of where he's down by like the upper single digits or like minus 10 points. But what I always found interesting about that is that that was kind of an average of two sets of pollsters that were presenting completely different realities of the country. There were some Republican aligned pollsters that like up until like even I think now still had Trump at net positive outright like approval rating. They had him at like +5, +10, like or like at worst like -2. And on the other hand, you had a lot of institutional pollsters like Gallup and AP that had Trump at -20, like the word like George W. Bush level numbers with independents, like completely losing support with young voters and Hispanic voters. And those averaged out to this kind of believable middle ground. But it was two different kinds of like political worlds that they were presenting. And what I thought like this election like kind of had the potential to show was which of those worlds are we living in. And I think the results that we saw are pretty definitively consistent, like to say the very least, with the world where Trump is at very historic lows in popularity. Because like in even in 2017, like a month before Democrats won a race in Alabama because of how unpopular Trump was, Republicans didn't lose Virginia by as much as they did. They didn't even come close to losing Virginia as much as they did this year. I think like it like that their loss that year was like 9 points. This year they lost by 15 at the governor's level. Like, and it kind of tracks with the idea that during Trump's first term, and like if you want to talk about like wokeness and the return of woke or woke two, Trump's strength was always on the issues that people always say they care the most about. The fact that he was unpopular was really kind of this exceptional moment where cultural issues, people thinking he was like a bad person and a bad leader and corrupt, and especially, and this feels like a billion years ago, disliking him as ineffective on immigration. That was none of those issues were nearly as salient as the economic thing. None of those were like kind of coalition busters as the economic stuff was. It was kind of just like running up the score with polarization. But the Democrats were still able to defeat him in like the span of 4 years during his first term. Now the basis for opposition to him is economic much more than it is cultural. The situation is reversed. And if you listen to what people say, like they now dislike Trump on the basis of something they actually care the most about. And you'd expect that to have a more kind of visceral and like salient reaction than even the first wave against Trump did. And like based on what we saw on Tuesday, that's what's happening.
And another, this is, I want to read another part of your piece here because this is really important. I mean, for all
Hmm.
of the, you also dive into the fact that that on the generic ballot, the
Yeah.
Democrats were somewhat underestimated, and
Yeah.
we'll talk about that in a sec. But I want to read this part of what you say here, where basically, yeah, Democrats, it's bad news in terms of national leadership, obviously being
Mhm.
incredibly unpopular, and the National Party being mistrusted or seen as out of touch. But in part, that's driven by their own voters, right? Like they are upset with leadership. And so that's
Yeah.
driving up Democratic unpopularity. They still have a major problem. But this one
Yeah.
silver lining that you write about is really good. Democrats may be able to pull this off because their national brand, although very toxic, isn't particularly sticky. their own unpopular president, Joe Biden, was seen primarily as a weak leader who represented the past. Although the fact that the party ran and supported such a leader is going to be a stain on them no matter what, it's also not that hard to distance oneself from someone like him, especially now that he has left public life. As such, if you give a candidate enough time and enough money to introduce themselves, they'll be able to establish their own reputation as an idealized good Democrat, irrespective of how the National Party is seen. I would say Graham Plattner getting out ahead in Maine is an example of this. But this part is really, I started. Republicans cannot pull off this trick because Trump has made himself synonymous with the Republican Party as a concept. This puts the GOP at a major asymmetrical disadvantage when their Trump loyalists are put up against a candidate who is not an incoherent 80-year-old man or one of his dead enders as they were in Virginia and New Jersey. So expand on that is a silver lining for Democrats branding if they choose to, and they haven't though, Josh, for years, decided to say Trump equals Republican. They have segmented it over and over again to pursue suburban Republicans, disaffected Cheney, Nikki Haley voters. Like, they have made it very hard on themselves, but Trump with his authoritarianism is gift wrapping it to them. Trump equals Republican and Democrat equals question mark.
Yeah, exactly. I think Democrat equals question mark is a great way to put it. Because if you do have in these races where candidates I mean, maybe it's changed like to some extent because like you have the results that are corresponding so closely with the results at like the statewide level top of the ticket. And that might be like a case like to kind of expand on that. If you have like a candidate, like I would say like Spanberger or Sherrill, not really exactly my preferred politicians. One is a literal CIA officer, but it is true they are younger. They have experience winning in tough districts. I think Spanberger won an election for Eric Cantor's old seat. It was a very historically Republican district in New Jersey. Sherrill won a seat based on Morris County, which is another ancestrally Republican area in New Jersey. So, and they have like these.
You meant
kind
Virginia for Cantor, right? Yeah. That's all.
Yeah. That's what I meant. It's both next to each other. It's basically the same thing.
I understand.
It's no different. Yeah, that's all you Northerners look the same to me. Like I can't tell the difference. It's just.
I mean, to be fair, Sherrill and Spanberger could be sisters, but we'll put that aside for now.
They were roommates. They're BFFs. It's cute. It's a nice, fun story. Or CIA girl boss, CIA girl power. They're BFFs. It's nice.
All right, I took you off track. Sorry. Go on.
Yeah. Sorry. Anyways. But they are like credible candidates with like compelling-ish backgrounds who can like create like I think that like a big thing that we've seen with Democrats, not to go back to the Kamala Harris campaign because I don't think anybody wants to relive that, but she did improve over Biden by a lot. And what I think is most notable about how she did that was that it didn't really come after she actually campaigned. It came when she became the candidate and people kind of saw her as a stand-in for like somebody who's younger and capable and experienced and articulate, unlike Biden. And then over the course of the campaign, she kind of diminishes that, and then she loses her favorability ratings. I kind of saw them as people seeing what they wanted to see in her because they just wanted there to be a good candidate in the race. And the story of the Kamala Harris campaign is that she dissuaded people of that impression.
Yeah.
In the case of Spanberger and Sherrill, I think that they might have actually did succeed in being that kind of like generic like good Democrat compared to like the bad Democrats like the Pelosi's or the Bidens or the old people like Schumer. They came off as like a contrast there. So even though the party's brand was very poor, they were able to kind of create their own distinct kind of brand of being a Democrat that people who like, including independents, not just Democratic voters, because the party has an image problem across the board. They could say, I think that I don't like DC Democrats, like they're like out of touch and incompetent. But like these people seem like pretty capable and that they don't like Trump and I don't like Trump, so I can go with them. And this is different from like the previous kinds of ways Democrats tried to separate themselves, like in very red states like Arkansas, the Blue Dogs who would like try to run on their own brand as Democrat, of like a conservative. That doesn't really work anymore. It doesn't work for Republicans and like running in blue states either. But that was a case where like when you had the destruction of the Blue Dogs, like in the Dakotas or like in Tennessee or the South or whatever, that was a case where there really was an ideological shift. That was like conservative voters who didn't want to vote for the Liberal Party, no matter what their candidate said. For the case with Democrats now, with swing voters, the issue isn't as much with ideology as it is with competence and leadership. And that's it's a lot easier to create your own brand of competence and leadership and distinguish yourself in that capacity than it might be to fight an uphill battle ideologically. And again, everybody assumes that everything is ideology now, and they assume that everything is like unfixable. And if somebody doesn't like a Democrat, it means that they're this hardline conservative on every single issue. But we saw it like in these races, they were able to like kind of perform at like a pretty like strong level in spite of the party's popularity. And that's something the Republicans in the races weren't able to do because they have Trump has such a strong leadership style that he like just defines the brand. He's still around. He's a sitting president. And there's nothing they can really even do about it if they want to. And they kind of Stockholm syndrome themselves, and they're not even wanting to do that.
And well, let me maybe add another theory. Zoran Mamdani's popularity increased
Yeah.
interest across the country. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, for all he probably elevated all of these candidates because there are young people seeing him on social media and engaged in politics, even if they're not from New York
Yeah.
City. And like, so I understand what you're saying about it being more competence, at least for now.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but there's also the idea that like there's a leading younger figure who's saying things as a Democrat that are genuinely impactful to people, even if they're not in New York City.
Yeah, that's how the Democratic Party at least advertised it on social media. If you looked at any of their graphics before the election, they always advertised Sheryl Spanberger and Mamdani. He was considered part of like the team and the coalition. He was the candidate. If you look at how like people just like celebrating the results on the internet, like who aren't usually tuned into politics, they were celebrating the Virginia and New York City races in the same breath. They saw it as like him defeating Cuomo as the same thing as a CIA officer winning in a like kind of light blue, purple. Now there's a blue state now. They like, and I think that is absolutely true in New York City, where again the candidates for comptroller and public advocate were not hurt by the association with Mamdani at all. And here's one final point I will say to that: every single like for the past number of years, there's been this big perceived crisis of the Democratic Party having a voter registration problem where they are hemorrhaging support like in like a voter registration in states where you can vote by like have a party ID. Like they like lost millions of voters in Florida. Republicans have a huge lead there where Democrats used to have a lead. I think they lost their lead in North Carolina. They've lost like their lead everywhere. They've made no gains. But in the big, and that somewhat continued into this year. It wasn't as bad as years before, but like they did have something of a decline in these states. It's this longstanding trend. But in New York City, New York State, not just New York City, over the past year, the Democratic voter registration total increased by 200,000 people, which I think is directly attributable to Mamdani being in the race.
Yeah.
And that is the kind of like surge in voter registration, just the massive electorate shifting, paradigm shifting thing that we last saw in the 2000s with Barack Obama.
Yep.
So when you have like a candidate, even in a local race at this point, because maybe New York City is just a case where like it's like becomes a national race because of the way the media covers it, like that can really lift all the votes for your party. And we saw like the Democratic candidates in Virginia and New Jersey, they won young voters. They won like a young woman by like in like incredible amounts. I think like there were some races where like they hit 80% with a young woman, which nobody talks about. We don't talk about how they aren't going on Rotten
Only
Mango.
young men get to be alienated. Yeah. Young women don't get to be alienated about a rapist being president or anything
they're never
like that.
alienated.
Yeah.
I love that the Odd Lots guy. He had that tweet where Republicans have absolutely nothing to offer downwardly mobile people with graduate degrees. They're out of touch with them culturally and economically. Like just kind of like reversing that is very fun to me. But young woman, like nobody wants to talk about how people need to go on true crime podcasts to reach out to the young woman vote. Nobody cares about them. They're just taken for granted. Nobody talks about Dobbs anymore because Trump won by 1.5 points after a cost of living crisis. But that doesn't matter. So we have to talk about young men. Everybody cares about us. We're the coolest people ever. But in those races, Cheryl won young men. Spanberger won young men. Zoran won young men by 40 points, even though he probably outdid Kamala Harris outright, even though she won by like 40 points in New York and he won by 10. So and I have seen personally, we live in Hood Geniuses Democratic Party now. We live in Hood Geniuses America. I saw people celebrating the results from like just places you wouldn't have seen them celebrating results for Democrats before, like NBA Twitter or stuff on TikTok. There are a number of trends there where people are just making fun of the Republicans, in the same way they made fun of Biden.
Yep.
It feels like really kind of it's like anti woke, I think, like anti Trump. That's the moment we're in.
Yeah, the vibe shift, I definitely think. I mean, at least from a year ago, it's seismic, it's dramatic, and it made itself known in these elections. You had 3 more points that are just a little bit, smaller, but still really important to point out. This third point here, centrist narratives about the black vote were dealt a major blow. Can you explain that? Because basically, my entire time paying attention to politics, the Democratic Party has fetishized the black vote.
I think I said fetishistic in an earlier draft.
And has conflated it with the more conservative institutions in the Democratic Party, Clyburn, the Congressional Black Caucus,
like a black woman.
Right. But the results, at least in New York City, showed that a lot of what their viewpoints were, here it is. I highlighted this sentence from you.
Yeah.
Pragmatism, not ideological centrism, ruled the day among black voters in elections.
Yeah.
That is a very different narrative than what we've been told for 20 years about the black vote within the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and I would say in a lot of ways, for often as frustrating as it has been to see centrist candidates win states like South Carolina and sweep the entire South, it is understandable. If you're that part, I don't want to speak on behalf of anybody's community, but it makes sense that you want to be on the side and make yourself indispensable of the candidate who's most likely to win. That is, by definition, as a bloc, how you consolidate political power the most effectively. And they have been undiscriminating against this. I think in the lead up to 2008, Barack Obama had a hard time consolidating the black vote because he was seen as someone who didn't have a shot at winning. So a lot of black voters preferred Hillary until he won Iowa, and showed that he was capable of winning over white voters in a way that no black candidate up to that point ever had. And this happens again in New York in the primary, where Zoran, and what's really exceptional about this and what I totally blew my mind when it happened, was that he gets the youth quake that Bernie never got, and none of the squad candidates running in low turnout House elections ever got. And he also was tremendously successful with non-white working class demographics that the left had never been successful with. If you look at how you compare him to Maya Wiley in 2021, or even the combined vote shares of Maya Wiley and Catherine Garcia, the 2 anti-Adams candidates, he was outperforming them by he was getting nearly 3 times the vote share in Asian areas, in Hispanic areas, in South Asian specifically. He practically controlled the entire Bangladeshi vote in places like the Bronx, where he made a big point of reaching out. But he did lose black voters. That was Cuomo's base. The Bronx was one of his worst counties, if not his total worst county. He lost the black vote areas in Queens. He lost them in Brooklyn. It was just the same story over and over again. But in this primary, the black vote completely flipped. I think that this time the Bronx was his second best borough. He went from not carrying the Bronx at all in the primary to he won it by 12 points. When he only won Manhattan by 10 and Queens by 5. Obviously, his best precinct was Brooklyn. He won there by 20. And this was directly because he flipped the black vote from Cuomo. He won across the board in southern Queens and southern Brooklyn. He won across the board in the almost all of the Bronx. He practically swept the entire center of it that used to be Cuomo territory. And the answer for this is if he didn't do that, I don't even know if he wins. If Cuomo gets his support with black voters that he had in the primary, I don't know if Zoran would have been able to actually pull this off. I mean, he might still have, because the turnout in places like the Bronx was pretty low, but it was a massive shift. I would be interested in seeing somebody map it, and it's for the same reason that he got endorsements from some Hasidic Jewish like communities at the very end of the election, the Satmars. Those people, they saw somebody who was overwhelmingly likely to be elected mayor,
Yeah.
and they didn't want to alienate that person. They wanted to get in on like being part of his administration and being an ally to him. And it's just a case where like it's a snowball effect where winning like begets more winning, where if you like are seen as a winner, then more people want to get on your side. And then that's how you build like your kind of counter establishment, which I wrote about in my piece about Plattner earlier.
Right. And also it makes a lot of sense that sometimes that there is, if you're a non-white community, or
Yeah.
like the fear of a Republican winning,
Mhm.
and the pragmatism argument about centrism, that was so sticky.
Yeah.
And the entire Democratic Party really bought into it, but you just need to notch a few wins like with Zoran, and then you
Yeah.
start to see like, oh, okay, you can take this risk and still be electable, and we can defeat the Republican,
Yeah. That's
which is
exactly
really
what happened with
important.
Obama in 2008.
Exactly, exactly. And then, just really quickly, because we got to run, but you
Mhm.
also talked basically about how your final points about takeaways here. The era of pro-Israel forces controlling the Democratic Party is over. And then you also point out that Newsom maybe didn't have the exact night that he wanted with this trying to be a springboard for his presidential ambitions. Just really quickly,
Yeah.
Josh, if you could expand on those notions.
I think like he was really kind of just screwed a bit by his election being on the same day as Zoran. Uh, it just that's just the way it worked out, because he was too successful for his own good to an extent, which sounds weird to say, and maybe it might not be true because he might be able to brag about like how much he won by and he's the big winner and he did stuff and he actually gets stuff done. But his big thing that actually got him into a position and like where he was leading in the polling was that he really dominated media attention during the whole redistricting saga, and prior to that, to a lesser extent, during the LA protests when he was publicly fighting against Trump. And he would have ideally had this election day be one where all eyes are really on him. But unfortunately for him, the East Coast, the polls here close at 7 p.m. and 9 p.m., while the polls in California close at 11. And as it turned out, the way that things counted in New York, Zohran Mamdani gave his victory speech at around 11:12 p.m. So the period of time that would have otherwise been dominated by like the Prop 50 results coming in and how Newsom is changing the map and winning all these voters and like successfully did this, it was the networks were carrying his victory speech. And don't discount the power of these election nights and like the perceptions they can give. Beto O'Rourke in 2018 lost his race, but because the way the votes were counted in Texas and the way votes were counted in other states, it looked like he was going to win in Texas because the urban areas counted faster than the rural areas. He looked like he was going to win in Texas at the same time when Democrats in states like Florida in 2018 were really lagging behind. So he got a couple good hours during that election night of people and celebrities and like people with actual influence talking about how he's the only candidate who pulled something off and how he needs to run in 2020. And that ended up obviously didn't end up working out, but he became like a national star for like a pretty prolonged period of time, even after his loss, purely because of how things happened to go out on election night. So now Newsom is like not really. This was kind of his last chance where Prop 50 is going to be in the spotlight. There's going to be a number of redistricting sagas that happen over the start of the year. There's going to be one in Virginia where they won a massive majority in the House of Delegates, so it'll probably be very easy to pass like whatever they're trying to pass there. But and on the other hand, Abigail Spanberger, like to the extent she has national ambitions, as I mentioned earlier, the Virginia governors are term limited, and they have 2 Senate seats that are presently occupied. So the only way to go up if you are the good governor elect is to enter national politics, and that could maybe mean a presidential run. I saw some centrist people on Twitter
Oh.
hyping up that possibility. It's very exciting. poor Josh Shapiro. He was the guy who like won by like 15, 20 points, like, running against a nut job, and was able to like run as the Republican whisperer for a couple of years. But now his spot has been taken. The CIA is once again taking control over Israeli forces, just like they did under George H.W. Bush. But I can say that because he actually I can see he was in the IDF, like he volunteered.
Yes, no, I know. I mean,
Yeah.
yes. But Jonathan Greenblatt would say, "Oh, he has no Palestine policy," which is very specific language to obscure the fact
Everybody in
that
the U.S. has a Palestine policy. He certainly does. But anyways, she won by 15 points. She was literally the first major Democratic win because of how quickly her race was called that people had seen in years. By what I call the Pop Crave Index, which is how well like election news it does on Pop Crave. She did pretty well. She got 174,000 likes. Zoran obviously did a lot better than her, but like that was like the big race everybody cared about. So like if she's not going to be running to be president, she is absolutely going to be at the top of any VP list in approximately a year and a half. So everybody get ready. The CIA doesn't die; it just regroups in hell. Dick Cheney's got. She's doing it for Dick. This is her legacy run.
All right. Well, but we were supposed to be positive here. That's how we're going to end it.
Well, we've got a socialist mayor elected in New York. I can mention that she won by 15 points in Virginia, and like maybe she'll be like John Ossoff's VP or whatever. Like, I think these things are pretty positive. At least she held up. That's the thing I will say with her and this whole group of people is that like her and Cheryl, like they had this dumb thing after the squad was elected where they were mad that the squad was getting all the attention. So they called themselves the badasses because they were all like ex-military people. And you know what? That's really stupid, but they can call themselves that now because at least they won. Unlike some other centrists that I could mention, they held up their end of the bargain. They hooped, they put up points, they won their races. And it's like, as we saw last year, you can certainly have things go a lot worse than that. So, like,
fair
congratulations
enough
to them. Yeah.
Well, Josh, you know, I'm a big fan of your Substack. I'm a subscriber. I encourage everybody else to do the same. Ettingermentum on Substack. Thanks so much for coming on the show and breaking down the results with me.
Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.